Okay, Morocco, land of, vibrant colors and those amazing spices, but also a history that's honestly way more connected to the US than most people realize, which is kind of what we're going to dig into today.
Yeah, it's funny how often Morocco is like just seen as this travel destination, right? Like everyone's got the bustling souks and the mosques in their heads.
The Blue City.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But beneath those iconic images is a story that goes back thousands of years. I mean, we're talking empires, revolutions.
hmm
It even touches on the very founding of the United States, which is wild when you think about it.
And that's what we're here to uncover. I mean, this isn't just about the pretty pictures, right? We're going deep on what makes Morocco tick. And speaking of going deep, how about this for a starting point? Morocco was actually the first nation to officially recognize the United States independence.
Back in 1777, no less.
1777, that's what, like a year after the Declaration of Independence?
It is indeed. And here's what's even more remarkable. That treaty they signed, it's still in effect today.
No way, seriously.
Seriously, which really speaks to this, often overlooked connection between Morocco and the U.S., and it highlights Morocco's long history of diplomacy and involvement in international affairs going way, way
In
back.
1777. I mean, that just kind of reframes how you think about Morocco being so far away.
It really does. And to understand the full weight of events like that treaty, we got to rewind a bit. Now, we could go all the way back to the prehistoric era in Morocco, and believe me, there's fascinating stuff there. But to really get a grasp on the Morocco of today, we need to fast forward a bit to the 7th century when the Arab conquest began.
Because so much of what we picture as like quintessentially Moroccan, it comes from this period, right? The language, the architecture, even the food, all of it's got those Arab influences woven in.
Exactly. But it's important to understand this wasn't some overnight takeover. Think of it more as a gradual blending, a fusion of Arab and Berber cultures that happened over centuries. So Arabic, brought by migrating populations from the Arabian Peninsula, it starts to interweave with the existing languages. Islam spreads, not through force, but through this kind of gradual integration, and eventually it becomes a cornerstone of Moroccan society. So this era, it wasn't just about conquest, it was about this incredible cultural exchange that laid the groundwork for what we now recognize as this distinct Moroccan identity.
Like this incredible tapestry, right? But instead of threads, you've got languages, religions, all these different cultural elements being woven together.
A very apt analogy. And like any good tapestry, there are going to be different patterns, different hands guiding its creation over time.
And that's where the dynasties come in, right? Because Morocco's got a history that's what, like a bit of a roller coaster ride when it comes to rulers and empires?
That's one way to put it. Morocco's history is punctuated by the rise and fall of these really powerful dynasties, and each one leaves their own mark on the cultural and political landscape. You've got the Almoravids, powerful warrior scholars who rose up in the 11th century, uniting Morocco under their rule, expanding their influence across North Africa and even into the Iberian Peninsula. Then you have the Almohads, another dynasty with, a penchant for knowledge and religious fervor.
Oh, yeah. The Almohads, those were the ones with the book bazaars, right? Which is such a cool detail.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Under the Almohads, Morocco became a center of scholarship. Incredible libraries, universities, they were flourishing. And yes, they even had what's considered the world's first book bazaar back in the 12th century.
I love that. It wasn't just about like military might with them. It was about fostering a love of learning, of intellectual pursuits.
Precisely. And that tells you something really important about Moroccan society at the time, wouldn't you say?
Totally. It wasn't just some coincidence that they loved books. It suggests that even in the middle of building empires, knowledge held this different kind of power.
It hints at a core value that has persisted through the ages in Morocco, this understanding that intellectual pursuit, cultural exchange, these things are essential to a thriving society.
But as we know, this period of like relative unity and prosperity, it couldn't last forever. New powers were emerging on the world stage, and Morocco, with its prime location, was increasingly entangled in a complex web of international relations. It's like all those threads in our tapestry, they start getting pulled in different directions, right? Because this back and forth, all those internal power struggles, it kind of set the stage for Morocco to become vulnerable to outside forces, which I guess is where the whole colonial era comes in. And honestly, it's something that I didn't even really fully grasp until we started, doing this deep dive. Like you see the European influence, right? In the architecture, even the language, sometimes it's subtle, but
It is subtle, and it speaks to how complicated this era really was. You can't talk about modern Morocco without talking about the impact of the French and Spanish protectorates in the early 20th century. It was this huge period of change, and it left a mark, one that continues to shape Morocco's identity even now, even their relationships with the world.
A mark almost feels too, like, I don't know, neutral a word for it, right? This wasn't just a friendly exchange of ideas. There were some serious power imbalances going on.
You're absolutely right, and it's crucial to remember that this was a time of resistance, of struggle. Take France, for example. Their interest in Morocco, it really boiled down to location, to strategy control over Moroccan ports, meant having access to both the Mediterranean and the Atlantic, which back then especially was a massive advantage for trade, for military positioning.
Prime real estate, basically. But getting their hands on that prime real estate, it wasn't exactly a peaceful negotiation.
Unfortunately, no. And the consequences were brutal. The Rif War, which was led by Abd el-Krim against those Spanish and French forces, it's a really stark example of just how brutal this period was. We're talking about the use of chemical weapons, the targeting of civilians. These are events that are often left out of the history books, but you can't understand the complexities of Morocco's fight for independence without understanding this era.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in. It's like these weren't just some abstract moves on a map, you know? These were events that caused real suffering, real human suffering, and the effects, I mean, you can still feel them today. But it also makes you realize how resilient the Moroccan people are, how they were able to hold on to their cultural identity even with all of that pressure.
Absolutely. It speaks volumes about the strength of Moroccan society, their adaptability. And this fight, it wasn't a one-time thing either. The fight for independence from Spain, that's still playing out today in Western Sahara. So it's a poignant reminder of how colonialism's legacy still shapes Morocco today.
It's that balancing act again, right? Modernizing, pushing for progress, but still dealing with the weight of the past. And speaking of balancing acts, what about the political climate in Morocco today? I know we mentioned King Mohammed VI earlier, but I'd love to understand how the government actually functions.
So today, Morocco is a constitutional monarchy, with King Mohammed VI as head of state. Now, while there is a parliament, they have a prime minister, there's a whole system of governance in place, the king still holds a significant amount of power, especially when it comes to things like religious matters, foreign policy, the military. So there's this interesting dynamic at play, this kind of dance between maintaining tradition and embracing modernization. And that really defines contemporary Moroccan politics.
Trying to fast forward into the 21st century, but without letting go of those traditions, it's a tough line to walk. So how's it playing out? Give us the good, the bad, the complicated.
Well, on one hand, you've got this incredible push for modernization happening on multiple fronts. I mean, they've invested heavily in their infrastructure. There's a high-speed rail line, for example, the first of its kind in Africa. They're also enacting economic reforms. And there are some really ambitious renewable energy projects underway, like they want to be a leader in sustainability, which geographically makes a lot of sense.
They are a gateway between continents, cultures.
Exactly. But it's not all straightforward. Alongside these advancements, there are concerns about human rights, things like freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. Those are still being debated. And of course, you can't forget the ongoing conflict in Western Sahara, which continues to impact Morocco's relationship with the rest of the world, and it's definitely a source of internal tension.
It's like that reminder that progress, it isn't a straight line, is it? It's messy, there are going to be contradictions along the way. But before we get too lost in the weeds of geopolitics, I want to circle back to some of those fun facts we found in our research. Because even with all the history, all the politics, it's those little details that really make a place come alive, you know?
Absolutely. Those details, those little things, those are often what stick with people.
For sure. Like, for example, did you know that Morocco has the largest port in all of Africa? And not only that, they are killing it in the renewable energy department. We're talking huge solar energy projects, like projects with the potential to not just power the entire country, but even to export energy to Europe.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. It's one thing to read about it, but if you ever get the chance to see those projects firsthand, it gives you a real sense of their commitment to a greener future.
Totally. And speaking of incredible things to see in Morocco, let's not forget about those Barbary macaques.
Oh, yes. Those mischievous monkeys. They're endemic to Morocco and Algeria, and they're a real treat to see in the wild. Sadly, though, their numbers are declining, mostly because of the illegal pet trade.
Which is just heartbreaking. They're so intelligent, so social, they deserve to thrive in their natural habitat. Okay, last fun fact, and this one I think really gets to the heart of Moroccan culture. Agriculture is still a huge part of their economy, like massive. We're talking 40% of the workforce is employed in agriculture.
It is. And it's a good reminder that even with all the talk about modernization, about globalization, Morocco's roots are still firmly planted in their agricultural heritage. And that's something that, as a visitor, you can connect with directly. When I think about it, those vibrant spices, the delicious tagines, the fragrant argan oil, it all comes back to that connection with the land.
It really makes you think about like food in a different way, doesn't it? Like those flavors, those smells, they tell a story. They're connected to generations of, farmers who've worked the land, who've kept those traditions alive. It adds this whole other layer to the experience of like actually eating Moroccan food.
It does. It reminds us that even as the world gets more globalized, more interconnected, understanding how a place relates to its food, to its land, that can give you such a deeper understanding of who they are, their cultural identity. It's fascinating.
It's like that saying, right? You are what you eat, but like on this whole other level,
Exactly. And with Morocco, what we see is this nation that's constantly grappling with how to hold on to its heritage, its traditions, while also moving towards the future.
It's a balancing act, wouldn't you say? And it really defines so much of their story.
It's a balancing act that's been playing out for centuries, if you really think about it. From those early dynasties to, like, navigating colonialism, and now here they are, trying to find their footing in the 21st century. Man who knew just reading Wikipedia could be this interesting. It really highlights how much we miss when we just, like, scratch the surface of a place, That's the beauty of curiosity, isn't it? It pushes us to look beyond those tourist traps, to really dig into the nuances of a place, the contradictions, the things that most people just, I don't know, overlook.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it so rewarding.
For sure. I feel like we've just scratched the surface here, which just makes me want to keep exploring even more.
Yeah.
Morocco's got such a rich history, such a resilient spirit. There's no way this is all there is to their story.
Absolutely not. And that brings to mind a question for you and for our listeners. With this history rooted in empires, in trade, with your unique position geographically, bridging those continents, this incredible blend of cultures, what do you think Morocco's role will be in our increasingly interconnected world? Something to think about, perhaps, on your next journey.
Ooh, that is a good question, and one I'll definitely be pondering as I'm wandering through those souks, sipping my mint tea. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. Until next time.